Okay, so, hi, hello, welcome back to another Creepypasta Story video. Today, Creepypasta I'm going to be reading is called Antran, but before I get to it, I do want to say a few things. First off, this video is a one take, so if you do hear me stumble, mumble, fumble, and mess up my words, I am sorry. And also, this video should be in 1080p. I fixed everything, so it shouldn't be as horrible anymore. But hey, it is what it is. Second thing I do want to say, please consider using code GOONS at gamersubs.gg. It's code GOONS, and you can use that to get 10% off at checkout. Gamersubs is the equivalent of code for adults that have caffeinated and non-caffeinated versions of the drinks, so if that interests you, go check them out. The link is at top of the description. But outside of that, let's get into it. This creepypasta is called Antran. The picture you're staring at was taken sometime in the 70s. It's the only image I have left of my son, an artificial being known as Antran, whom we had adopted into our family at the time. It was a warm summer break in the mid-70s. I was driving home from my logging company after a long shift, but I had to make a stop at a local garbage tip to drop off some old desks my mother had given us. And when I got there, something caught my eye as I bent down, and upon closer inspection, I was shocked to see what I originally thought was a doll. A plastic outer shell with metal limbs and, more shockingly, a humanoid face with cold and dark eyes. I'll be honest and say I wasn't curious at the time. I was incredibly impressed with the workmanship of this thing, so I didn't think twice before placing it carefully along the back seat of my car and taking it home. My son's interest was almost as tense as mine. We bonded over the course of a few days, opening it up and looking at all of the circuitry, and seeing if anything had been misplaced and broken. Eventually, to our surprise, the being, or android, seemed to come to life. Its limbs turned, its hands gripped, its eyes displayed a somewhat sentient tint, and after a few moments, it managed to stand on its own accord. Needless to say, we were scared, yet fascinated. I thought to myself about who could have created such a wonderful, remarkable piece of work. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I realized that this wasn't a toy or a doll. It showed incredible signs of intelligence and thinking ability. It learned to do everyday things such as taking out the trash and playing with my son's toys. It even had a favorite, a small red car that it drive alongside the kitchen counters. It learned to mimic our ways, trying to eat from a fork, despite it having no digestive system, and even moving its mouth, despite lacking the ability to speak. I knew that this was something else, and perhaps a military piece of hardware or a private project. I knew I should have handed him in, but when I watched my boy play with it so happily, his face lit up. I couldn't do it. He'd always been so lonely, and this thing was one of his only friends. What kind of father would be to deny him the right to be happy? It couldn't hurt to allow him to keep it for a while. We named him Antran, which was the print in capitals written in small font across his back. A few months passed quickly, and family life seemed to be improving. He was one of us. My lad's grades improved and his mood improved. Everything was getting better until one evening in July. I was sitting in my armchair with a beer watching television. My boy and Antran were knelt down on the rug, play fighting with one another, as boys do. Suddenly, my attention was drawn to a loud gasp. I looked down and saw my child gripping his arm. "What's wrong, Adam?" I asked. He rolled up his sleeve, and on his skin was a large, red mark covering his forearm. "Antran pinched me," he replied in a shaky voice. The mark was indeed red. It was soon bruised into a swollen, purple lump, and my fatherly instincts took over. Like a parent telling off a naughty child, I shouted at the android. Its cold, metallic face, for a moment, seemed to show genuine sadness and sorrow, as though it was as apologetic that it didn't know its own strength. Then its lips moved, whether it was trying to muster up the words to say sorry through language or merely copying what I was doing. I will never know. And later on in the evening, I apologized for the shouting and told it everything was okay and thought nothing of it. A few weeks later, my child came into my room, and it must have been early in the morning. My slumber was interrupted by a gentle creaking of my bedroom door. "Dad," he whispered. "Yes, son," I replied. "It keeps looking at me." What does?" I asked him through tired eyes. "Antran, he keeps looking at me at the end of my bed." His voice trembled, fearful. I could tell something wasn't right. I noticed him rubbing his other arm and immediately called him over. Pulling up his sleeve, my heart sank. There were more bruises. It must have been 4 or 5, all the way up his small arms. "Take off your shirt, Adam," I asked, trying to keep calm. I could feel a cocktail of emotions rising within me. Panic, fear, anger. He took it off, and as the waist pulled over his small head, my heart sunk. My heart sunk further and my eyes welled up. Before me, my son stood, his small frame coated in bruises of different sizes and shades of brown and purple. Immediately, I got up and stormed over to Adam's room. Nothing. I shouted at the top of my lungs for the being, looking under the bed and out of the closed bedroom window. Suddenly, there was a loud knock from above us, then hard footsteps. "It's in the loft," I whispered, my eyes to the heavens. As I paced down the corridor, I noticed that the walls on the other side of me were coated in scratches, all the way up to the now swinging piece of string that led to the small loft door. Slowly, I pulled it open, telling my scared son to stay where he was. The ladder fell down, and I climbed up. Taking a hold of the torch we left on the side of the opening, I switched it on, and only to find the small window we had there was smashed. It had escaped. Immediately, I was considering calling the emergency services, but who was going to believe me? A sentient metallic being hurt my child. They'd take one look at the bruises and have me locked up for abuse. I had no choice but to keep quiet. Weeks, then months passed, and every time we went outside, we noticed ever-increasing signs of Antran's presence. The familiar scratch marks along the bricking of my home. Also, plants have been disturbed, with patches of mud leading up to the window. I feared for my son. I never let him out of my sight, and as I took him to and from school. What had caused the sudden hostility towards us? Had we done it wrong? Was it my shouting? I found myself speaking out loud in the evenings, apologizing to the walls and to an empty room, in the hopes that Antran would hear, that he will stop the taunting and endless stalking of my home. But my attempts were in vain. If I had known what would come, I wouldn't have slept that night. My rest was once again disturbed, this time by a blood-curdling scream. My eyes darted open, and immediately, almost as a natural instinct, I rushed to my son's room. It was too late. The room has been turned upside down, and everything was on the floor. The bedsheets ripped and his window smashed. I burst into tears, screaming at the top of my voice for my son back. I called the police, telling them that he had been kidnapped. They asked if I'd seen the culprit, so I lied and said I hadn't, hoping that the images of my son would be enough. Like they believed that this doll was sentient or harmful. And for the next few days, I cried myself to sleep, sobbing like a child. Life wasn't worth living anymore. I wish I never found that thing. I betrayed my son's trust in me as a father to protect him. Now I paid the price. It was a September dawn. I was sat in my armchair drinking when I heard the pantry door creak open. "Adam?" I called, rushing to the kitchen. Again, nothing. Except there, on the kitchen counter, was Antran's favorite red toy car. That was a creepypasta called Antran. Hopefully y'all enjoyed. Also, I put the photo of Antran up on here since I have the ability to do that now. So hopefully y'all enjoyed the Creepypasta story. Outside of that, I don't really have anything else to say, but I did think it was a good creepypasta. I actually quite enjoyed it. So hopefully y'all enjoyed it too. And yeah, I don't have anything else to say, but I do want to say thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye everyone.